Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, it's Wednesday the 29th of December. It's your Great British Breakfast with Simon McCoy and me, Ellie Costello. More from us in a moment. We're going to be going through the papers, but first, let's bring you up to date on the latest news headlines with Paul Hawkins.
Thanks, Ellie. Our top story this morning, the Scottish Parliament will be recalled this afternoon for a COVID update as case numbers reach record highs. The virtual session was announced last week after Nicola Sturgeon outlined new restrictions, including 1 metre social distancing and the closure of nightclubs. Deputy First Minister John Sweeney is urging Scots not to travel to England for New Year's Eve amid more relaxed COVID rules south of the border. Brian Monteith, former member of the Scottish and European Parliaments, thinks the current restrictions could actually be eased.
Actually, she recognises what the stats are telling us, and that, in fact, she's going to have an urgent review that may allow her to relax her regulations sooner than she suggested they would last.
Policing insulate Britain's road-blocking protests cost taxpayers at least £4.3 million. The group blocked motorways between September and November, calling on the government to cut carbon emissions by insulating UK homes. Metropolitan Police spent the bulk of the money, with over 6,600 officers and staff dealing with the campaigners. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said he was appalled by the bill. The social care system is not fit for purpose and handing some children over to criminal gangs. That's according to a new report. The Commission on Young Lives says many teenagers are moved away from where they live and sometimes end up in areas with high levels of crime. Criminal gangs have also been tipped off when vulnerable teenagers are moved into unregulated accommodation. The report said social care was failing to identify children at risk of exploitation early enough. Former Children's Commissioner for England and chair of the report, Anne Longfield, told GB News more needs to be done.
We've got is, in all kind of essence, an epidemic of teenagers that are coming to harm. They're being exploited, they're being targeted by gangs and those that wish to involve them in violence. I'd like a new teenagers' social care system, if you like. I'd like it to really concentrate on understanding and recognising when teenagers were at harm early and working with those families to wrap support around those families. We need a kind of ring of protection for those kids.
An economic think tank is warning that millions of families face a cost of living catastrophe in 2022. The Resolution Foundation says that from next April, families will be £1,200 a year worse off due to soaring energy bills and an increase in national insurance contributions. At the same time, rising inflation means that real pay levels will stay the same. Becky O'Connor is the head of pensions and savings at Interactive Investor.
For the long term, if you want to beat inflation, investments are going to probably give you a better chance of doing that than savings accounts. So, if you don't need that money in emergency savings and you can't foresee needing it at all in the next 5 years or so, then perhaps the stocks and shares ISA is something to look at instead.
The Scottish Government is under fire for failing to tackle the shortage of doctors in Scotland. British Medical Association has said many are at breaking point with pressure from the pandemic causing fatigue and frustration. They're urging ministers to enforce a proper plan to reverse the decline in numbers, reduce the workload and help provide financial stability for GPs. But the Scottish Government say they are on track to deliver its commitment of 800 extra GPs in the next decade. And finally, the Royal Mint has unveiled 2 new coins to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The 50p coin is the first of its kind to recognise a royal event, whilst the £5 coin follows the tradition of marking previous jubilees on crown pieces. They are the first collector's items to be released in memory of the Queen's 70-year reign. You're up to date with the latest. I'll be back in half an hour with the latest headlines. Now it's back to Ellie and Simon.
I hope we pay our musicians by the minute.
There's a lot going on today.
You're watching an extended Great British Breakfast with Ellie and Simon. Now let's just have a look at what's making the front pages this morning. And on the front page of The Telegraph, Test and Trace is not having its finest hour. They've been telling people to isolate incorrectly, says the paper. Messages are still asking people to isolate for 10 days when new guidance has been cut to 7 days.
The Mirror's offering us some positivity. That's nice, isn't it? With the headline, New Year, New Hope. There's a growing feeling that Omicron will not swamp the NHS after Professor Sir John Bell said that the worst of the pandemic may well be over.
The Daily Mail's led with cut isolation to 5 days after last week. The period was slashed from 10 to 7 days after testing negative 2 days in a row. There's also a story about the Harry Potter reunion, which won't feature J.K. Rowling.
The Times is also leading with the story of cutting isolation. The Prime Minister is being urged to cut isolation period to relieve the stress on the NHS. And there is a fear for thousands of children being stuck in illegal and unregistered schools. That's according to an Ofsted director.
The Guardian's gone for a cost of living front page. It says next year UK families could face a hit of £1,200 as wages fall and bills rise. A leading think tank says households face a cost of living catastrophe.
On the front of The Independent, why has the Ashes gone so wrong for England? A deeper look into the team.
The I newspaper leads with hospital cases climbing, but serious illness from Omicron remains lower. It says the number of COVID patients in hospitals has risen 38% in a week to 9,500. The good news, though, is there's no increase in the use of ventilators.
An optimistic front page again in the Daily Express today. Dare we hope? Worst of COVID is history. The paper claims that scientists believe the worst of COVID is finally over as jabs reduce deaths.
Front page of the day goes to The Sun. It leads with rave hearts. Pub landlords in England are bracing themselves for an invasion of Scottish and Welsh drinkers for New Year's Eve. It's expected that almost 100,000 could cross the border to avoid the COVID restrictions at home.
And The Star, on a different note as always, it leads with Elon, we have a problem. China has complained to the UN after an Elon Musk satellite had a near miss with its space station.
Well, let's have a look at some of the inside pages. We're joined by the journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani and the Spiked Online editor Tom Slater. They've been with us all morning. And Tom, we've been reflecting on the change of mood in the papers. The word hope has appeared on a couple of front pages. And certainly for England, you get a sense that the politics is paying off for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, it feels like the cloud is starting to lift. And given the fact that in the days and weeks since Boris Johnson originally kind of delayed bringing more of these new restrictions, that things are starting to suggest that the gamble is paying off. There's a piece here in the Mail today just listing all of the reasons why we should all be cautiously optimistic, not only, as you were talking about, Ellie, with John Bell's comments about the worst of this possibly being over, that kind of era of just potential waves of mass death being behind us, but also a lot of the people in hospital with COVID at the moment actually went into hospital for other things. They've seen a big rise in these kind of incidental cases. The issue around the kind of surging of casing, the doubling time is reduced. It might even be flattening off. And most importantly, the vaccines are working. I mean, a large proportion of the people who are in hospital at the moment are because, unfortunately, they've chosen not to get vaccinated. And so because of that combination of this Omicron variant being about 70% less likely to land you in hospital, because so many people are vaccinated, also because so many people have caught the virus as well, topping up that immunity, things are so much different to what they were last year. And we really could be in a position now where the worst is behind us and things can only get better from here. So cautious optimism and potentially signs that Boris Johnson's gamble might have paid off in that respect.
Nabila, what are your thoughts on that? England is the outlier here, not just in the UK, but also in Europe. Is this a gamble that's going to pay off for him?
Well, there seems to be two schools of how to deal with the pandemic, and effectively England is standing out in its way of dealing with it. It's quite different from what we're seeing elsewhere in Britain, in Scotland and Wales, to the extent that we are told we're going to have 100,000 of revellers coming from Scotland to join the celebrations in England, where restrictions are less, to avoid restrictions in Scotland and indeed in Wales. So it's interesting that England and the EU seem to have different approaches where perhaps more precautionary measures are being taken elsewhere, including in France, for example, where I spend a lot of time, where there's a lot of restrictions, where COVID passes were introduced months ago to have a look into cafes and restaurants, and new restrictions are introduced as far as eating habits are concerned, and on transport and links, and indeed in cinemas.
It's interesting. I mean, you say you spend a lot of time in France. We know what Emmanuel Macron thinks about Britain, but what are people, when you go out and talk to people, is there a sense that post-Brexit UK is doing better than many had thought?
Well, there's certainly facts about the successful vaccine rollout in Britain, where, pretty much the vast majority of people are vaccinated. There remains a lot of scepticism around taking the jab in France, to the extent that the government is taking drastic measures to make it compulsory. And there's a lot more scepticism, which is a bit odd, given that France is the country of Pasteur and indeed vaccination. So, and we've seen, the standoff between the two leaders over the issue of vaccines, and indeed the very fact that, President Emmanuel Macron has made no secret of, his hatred of Brexit, and the Brexit vaccine, if I may put it that way, is something that Macron seemed to be quite resentful about, and certainly of its success.
Not resentful, he was horrid about it. We'll leave it there.
Tom, The Guardian has dedicated its front page to the cost of living catastrophe. It's obviously about the cost of living, but also a rise in energy bills. For lots of people, it's going to be a very tough winter, isn't it?
Yes, so this cost of living catastrophe, as the Resolution Foundation have named it. So families being hit by an increase in £1,200 on average next year. And it's just this kind of perfect storm, a horrendous storm of factors. So you've got the hike in energy bills, as you say, you've got rising inflation, wages are stalling, and of course rises in national insurance. So just basically people being bitten from every direction in relation to their finances. And there's huge questions which now need to be discussed about the energy price cap, discussions even about potentially having to bail out the poorest families in relation to their energy bills, because of the fact we've heard talk of them doubling, potentially tripling in a short period of time because of all of this kind of horrendous storm of factors. So this is the sort of thing, whilst there is a bit of optimism in the papers this morning, which will no doubt be good news for Boris Johnson, this cost of living crisis could really be the thing that does it for him in the end, I think. Something which could really cut through any sense of optimism people might have had coming out of this crisis as it has been at the moment.
Nabila, I know that there's a story about Prince Andrew, the latest legal move he's taking in the United States. He, of course, denies all charges against him, but his lawyers are still looking to have these any complaint against him thrown out.
Well, yes, indeed. Prince Andrew has accused, effectively, the woman suing him for rape of pretending to be a US resident when she lives in Australia. And his lawyers have urged an American court to rule that he has no jurisdiction to hear Virginia Roberts' sex claims against him. Now, in the latest salvo of the legal battle, the Duke's lawyers also branded her legal actions as suspicious and calculated. But Prince Andrew's lawyers are pretty confident that they can get the case against him thrown out. And it's pretty obvious by now that Prince Andrew will never go anywhere, anywhere near a court, and this entire case will go nowhere, in my opinion. But what's also pretty clear is that the British royal family doesn't do trials, and that lawyers will move heaven and earth to make sure that this convention remains in place. And at the moment, we have this investigation into Andrew's past going on, and also one into alleged bullying by Meghan Markle. And as we saw with Meghan Markle's case against the Associated Newspapers, no trial was required, and it's likely that the bullying case will quietly fade away too. So it feels very much like it's one rule for the royal family and quite another for everybody else.
Well, it's really good to see you both, and thank you very much for guiding us through the papers this morning. Nabila, Tom, thank you.
And that's it from the two of us. Thank you very much for your company this morning. Coming up next, it's Colin Brazier. He's going to be here from 10, but next it's Uncancelled. Before all of that, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking wet and windy across many areas as a band of rain moves through. Let's take a look at the details. Rain will clear from the southwest this morning, with many parts dry by lunchtime. Breezy, especially around the coasts and over the hills. Very mild with highs of 16 Celsius. Heavy rain will clear in the southeast too, with drier weather trying to move in around midday. Breezy but exceptionally mild for the time of year. Wales will become dry with perhaps a few glimmers of sunshine developing. A few spots of rain still possible, largely over the hills. It will be windy too. Over to the Midlands, and once the rain moves through, it will become drier with perhaps a few brighter beats to the sky from time to time. Breezy but very mild with highs of 14 Celsius. Generally wet morning across northern England. Some of the rain will be heavy at times too. Breezy around the coasts and over the hills, turning milder as the day wears on. Plenty of heavy rain across Scotland all morning, falling as snow over the mountaintops. Windy in the west and still fairly chilly compared to the rest of the UK. It'll be largely dry across Northern Ireland, but windy for many areas, often cloudy, but some bright spells developing every so often. Some mild west winds will lift temperatures to around 13 Celsius. The rain will gradually clear to leave a dry afternoon for most. Further rain in the southwest later on. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBviews@gb